Auto started recording. Hi, Charlie. Oh, look, there's a weird waiting room. I swear I told it not to do that. Admit all. I'll just keep refreshing the admit all. I feel like I should have cool music and like a waiting room thing happening here. Admit all. Admit all. 2 in the waiting room. Okay, I am going to get us started here. Thank you for joining, everyone, for our weekly How We Do. Charlie, can I ask you a favor? Just say yes. Okay, which is keep an eye on the waiting room. I didn't mean to set it up with the waiting room, but I did. So you are authorized as a co-host, I think. So it should let you. I'm hoping. Otherwise, I'll try and keep an eye on it. But I'm not.
I'm hoping I'll keep an eye on it, but I haven't seen it pop up yet.
Oh, that means it's not doing it for you because I'm admitting people as we speak.
Yeah, I don't see the admit.
Okay. Well, then I'll just keep an eye on it. It'll be fine, I'm sure. Okay. Welcome to our second How We Do. We are recording this session. I'll share it broadly afterwards. Today we are going to talk about user story maps. And so this is a topic near and dear to my heart that I can talk about all day, every day. So prepared for my nerdiness. All right, so user story maps. I said last week as we were talking about solution maps, we would talk more detailed about how user story maps work, how we use them at Solution Stream. And so here is kind of your introduction to user story maps. Okay, so first things first, I think Jeff Patton is the person who gets credit for, he will say, not inventing user story maps, but writing a book about them and maybe popularizing them. This is his book. It is called User Story Mapping. Came out in, I want to say at the end of 2014. And wow, did I geek out on it like right from the beginning. I had an occasion to talk with Jeff like a year ago. He lives in Park City. And I told him I think I've given away more copies of his book or just bought more copies than anybody else. I think I'm at like 34 times I've purchased this book through Amazon. So just if you get a chance, I recommend it highly. But let's talk about what user story mapping is. Let's see. So first, of course, I think all of us, we work in software, we know what a user story is, but I'm just going to run through it a little bit. User stories are supposed to be a few sentences in simple language that outline a desired outcome. And here's my little made up user story. As a shopper, I want to search products so I can find the product that I'm looking for. So we all have kind of this familiarity with this story pattern. It's supposed to describe a small bit of work. And when we're building a product, especially those of us that are in product management and have that background, as we're starting to think what we want in a product, we build this backlog. It's this collection or the list of all the stories that we want to include in our product. But there's a problem with user stories, and it's that you start to get a whole lot of them, and you're thinking of all these different things that you want to do, and then maybe you start adding in different personas that need to be interacting with the application as well. And there's just too much to build, and wow, it's super hard to visualize what actually is important, what's valuable. How do you prioritize? This has been a challenge that's like noodled in my head for a long time. You know, we all the time are interacting with clients and trying to guide them through developing a product and determining order of operation, you know, and prioritize is this word that we throw around all the time. It actually really, really matters, order of operations, when we're building software. And a lot of times the things I was finding historically with backlogs is it is really hard to tell what's important across just this big jumble of user stories. So a user story map organizes stories from the user's perspective, which is a super simple sentence. But what it does is it actually brings a structure to a flat backlog, and it enables a product team and the client. You know, we Solution Stream generally play that product team role, but it really is a powerful tool for our customers as well, because it does help you to visualize the actual customer journey. And I'm going to dive more deeply into that concept here in just a second. But I do want to talk about some of the things I see as the biggest benefits of using user story maps. The first is it really does put the focus back on the user. It helps us prioritize the valuable work. It helps us actually to visualize the valuable work. It keeps our view a lot more holistic. You know, I think we've all been in the situation as we're in development. You got this big backlog in Jira. You're adding things to a sprint, but like, how's it moving us towards a holistic product that a client or an end user can actually use, get value out of, et cetera. It also is a great way to break down epics. It's a great way to visualize where you have epics really that need kind of some breaking down the boulders. It builds team consensus, and I think it's just full visibility. So just some of the nerdy reasons why I love user story maps. Now I'm going to see if I can get out of this, and I'm going to pull up an actual user story map, because that helps me to have this conversation a little bit better. So I want to pull back up our user story map that we use for our sample for our clients. It's this map shop. How do you build a user story map? So I want to start with kind of, I had this big plan of us playing a game where we all got to build our day, design our day. But instead, I just want to talk through how we go about building a user story map. So I mentioned they are very focused on an individual user. In this situation, the user that we're focused on initially is the shopper. And you'll notice, like, I'm not using a lot of heavy user story verbiage here. You know, I have it in some of these stories, not that one, where it says, as a user, I want to see recommendations so that I can compare products or not compare products, so that I can understand I don't know, I don't actually have too much passion personally around using the verbiage. What I do think is important is the action itself. So one of the big challenges we find with user story maps, and this is kind of a conversation that, well, Jeff and I actually have this conversation a decent amount, around just, it's really easy, especially for people who have been doing software for a long time, to always visualize products at a page level. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to pull up this for just a second. This is our wireframe for our fictitious solution map that we use as an example. It and this user story map are supposed to be describing the same thing. But you'll notice here, I don't have a page here that's, or a story here at the top that's called like landing page. This is, all of our clients want to say, hey, we need a landing page. This is really focused on actions that the user is doing. And so when we sit down to start building a user story map, one of the first things we will walk the client through is, and I'm going to just ignore these blue ones for a minute, starting at the yellow. The yellow is supposed to describe primary actions that the user is trying to do. So using that example here, first thing I'm doing as a user here on this e-commerce site is I want to find a product. Once I find a product, what's the next major thing I want to do? I want to examine the product, consider it a little bit. Assuming I like the product, then I'm going to want to add it to my basket. Now, we all know we can't build software without having a sign up and a sign in. I would question whether users actually are very interested in doing those, but those are actions probably that the business is going to interject on the potential user and say, hey, we got to have a sign up, we have to have a sign in. And we're going to go ahead and dictate for this situation that they have to do that before they can place an order. But then once they place an order, I'm going to need them to make a payment. I'm going to need them to pick a shipping type. And so you can see there's this order of operation of how a user is walking through an application. And one thing I really love about that, come back to me. Okay. One thing I really love about that is when we're teaching customers how to go through this process and how to start to visualize their product in this way, the activity that we have them do is to map out your morning. We say, okay, take these stickies, write out what you did to start your day. Okay, I took a shower, I made breakfast for the kids, I make, I take dogs for a walk, and I start to write those out. Helping a customer see the path that users take through even a software that they haven't started to really coalesce around features really helps them focus on the action somebody needs to do, not just a bunch of screens we want to put in front of people. And so under each of these yellow epics, now we start to have different things that are part of that action. So if I'm going to be finding a product, I'm in my e-commerce map shop, what are some things that would be part of finding a product? Search absolutely is going to be kind of a primary one, but then maybe I'm going to get recommendations, or I'm going to get top selling products. If there's a lot of products, I'm probably going to want to have categories, and I'm probably going to want to have advanced search. These are smaller increments of functionality, but in addition to being smaller, the other part I love about this is they're negotiable. You could build a product, a product to be an e-commerce product and never have anything other than basic search. You could say, hey, you know what? We don't need any of this other stuff. Oh, I don't get to move this because I'm not actually logged in. Curse you. Now I want to log in. Now I have to. I'm sorry. Be patient with me 1 second. Password? I'm supposed to remember my password? All right, hold on. Also, if you ever want to have a conversation with me where I can get really riled up, talk to me about authentication, because I think it's one of the most jacked up things we put users through from the technology side. Like, again and again and again, getting into systems, it's so dumb. In the name of security, we have made it awful to try and use software. So small diatribe over. And I still can't find my. So we have been using Stories on Board for years now. I think we're probably one of their most long-standing customers. And we love this application, although we have played with other ones. Jira actually released a user story mapping functionality. I think it was last year. Still out, I think, the jury on whether or not we like it. The thing that kills me is the epics part of things just seems broken. But all right, so now I can actually prioritize. Woo! All right, woohoo! I love it. So beyond building the user story map, one of the things that I really love about it so much for client conversations, and I mentioned this a little bit last time around the solution map, software is always a negotiation about what to build. You know, I had that screen up that says there's always too much to build. It doesn't matter what project you're on, what software you've built. We've all been there. Like, there's just so much that people want. This just really lets you be laser focused on what actually is going to bring value. And, you know, not just for us, it's really, really hard for customers to stay focused on the must-haves, you know, and when you're forced to see the give and take, like, what if I only have enough time to complete 74 story points, if I only have enough budget to complete 74 story points, I start to get really, really focused on whether or not I think signup should be part of my initial MVP, you know, and do I really need to use Google to sign in if that's going to cost me the ability to add to basket, you know? And the other thing I really like about this is, for us as people who are advising clients about the right order to build things in, being able to show them that they're not just deciding between recommendations and basic search, right? They're not just prioritizing within a particular area. They're prioritizing across the entirety of their product. And therein, like, it is the challenge for them is to make sure that they're prioritizing the things that matter. The other thing I think for us is it helps us visualize how we can get to value quickest. This is something around Agile in general that I just have a lot of passion. You know, we always talk about MVPs, but when we start a project, one of our challenges as an organization is, how do we get to value the quickest for the client? And I'm always thinking, you know, all right, the client's identified this MVP, that's release one. But what are 2 or 3 things that both are the most complex? In this situation, I can kind of see, this might be the most complex story that I have. I'm just basing that off of the 9 story points that are here. It's a decent amount of story points. One of the things that we have been playing with, those of us that regularly run solution maps, we're kind of always inspecting and adapting the way that we're building these. And one of the things that we've been playing with is, you know, identifying a different color for stories that are riskier, so that a development team can be, as they open a user story map after the solution map is done, and say, okay, let's build this thing that you guys kind of made up with a client 2 weeks ago, that you can start to quickly get up to speed about what the application's supposed to do, but then also really do better about identifying the riskiest places, so that you as a team can rally around, hey, this is the client's most important feature. This is the one thing that if we built nothing else is going to bring them the most value. Or it's that critical starting point that everything else is going to be sitting upon. And gosh, we may not even have these designs yet. Our design team might still be going through those, but the back end of what this needs to do, or the risk is right around this, and we can start to rally around that as a team and be focusing on how to get through those risks quicker and how to start to bring the value faster to the client. So that's kind of the basics about how user story maps work and how we use them. Now I want to talk just a little bit about cons. And I mentioned that those of us who are regularly doing the solution maps, we're constantly kind of looking at this project, because one of the things that we do is we finish a solution map, we start the project, we plug this and directly into Jira, and we can sync this with Jira so that, and I don't have this one synced, I probably should, so that these stories become the user stories inside of Jira. But there's challenges for us around that, part of it being that ultimately, if I have a development team working on see details of selected product, the underlying tasks and all of the stuff that ultimately will result in the completion of this story could end up being a whole lot of detail, and ultimately this card itself will probably be more of an epic level story inside of Jira as we start to break that down. But sometimes we do struggle with converting elegantly these concepts to executable features. And even on this, like I'm a little obsessed sometimes with how to break things down even more and more and more. There's a lot of features on this page and links and, these scenarios. Some of these are just, we don't actually use scenarios that way. I didn't make this. It says it's got my name on it, but I actually stole it from Stories on Board. It was their basic sample. But we do, I don't want to say struggle. We have an ongoing effort to get better at how we use the user story maps after we're done with the solution map. One of the other things that I think we're constantly trying to look at is, once we get into Jira, it's easy to start driving conversations with the client through Jira. But even that story map plugin that's in Jira, I don't think does as good of a job at conveying the trade-off between feature sets or between individual user stories. And so, best practices, we across the delivery side, across product and Scrum Masters and project managers are also kind of, hey, how do we get this as more of a regular part of the conversation? In my ideal happy world where everything works exactly how I imagine it, every time a client comes and says, hey, what would be awesome if we could put into this application, we would pull this up and say, all right, Bob, tell me about this awesome idea that you have. All right, I want it to do this and this and this. And we would be almost doing, a little bit of breakdown. Oh, you want to have top selling products? All right, well, let's think through what that feature needs to do, and capturing it right here so that then all of those details are not lost. And then, engineering can then be in a collaborative conversation with the product owner or the Scrum Master and saying, hey, this is what the client's saying. Let's talk about this. And identifying that every new thing absolutely has a story point in it, and absolutely has a trade-off when we add it, that the client needs to be explicitly involved. And so we are not as good at that as when I get to manage projects, I'm not as good at it as I want to be. I end up having too many conversations with clients where I say, that's awesome, I'm adding it to the Jira backlog, but I'm not showing them here what the trade-off is, because there always is one. There always is one. So that's probably as much time as y'all want to listen to me ramble. Anyone have any questions? It's always that moment where I wonder, have I been on mute the whole time? Except somebody would have said, Cameo, you're on mute.
Any other, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to add one of the things that that we've liked about this, especially for clients that really struggle with the kind of being technically savvy and really understanding the stories, is that we can link these two together and have the client being able to come back into here on a regular basis and seeing kind of the story map and seeing the completion coming from the JIRA statuses. And that's just been super useful for those that are a little less savvy that way. So they're not trying to dig through the big lists in JIRA, and they're actually able to just kind of watch as these different columns are going into the done state and seeing how that moves along. That's been a very helpful thing for those simpler clients. So
that's a good point. And it also illustrates another one of our challenges. If we don't have these stories broken down in enough, kind of to a small enough amount, then if you end up with a story that crosses 2 or 3 or 4 sprints, you end up with a story that doesn't feel like it's moving. But that also can be a potential benefit, because if our collective goal is to be regularly releasing valuable, usable software, or potentially releasable software, for those of you from our Scrum conversation yesterday, making sure that when somebody starts on a particular story, we have a path to try and complete it as quickly as possible is kind of a key component of regularly releasing, value, because that's not an uncommon situation, I think, across all of software, to have a portion of a thing done and to kind of sit from sprint to sprint to sprint as little bits are being added, but nothing completed to a point where you could potentially release it.
I was going to ask, is there a place in the stories on board where you reflect that things are done as well, or does that only happen in JIRA?
So when we tie this, anytime a story gets completed in JIRA, it will mark it as done. And I could go into somebody else's stories on board and show you. When we don't have them tied, like right now, this is not directly tied to JIRA, you just would have to manually mark them, which would be obnoxious. But yeah, when we have these tied, it shows the done right there, and we don't move them, right? The done features remain in the user story map, which is also a really cool way to show client progress. When you can start to see, look, we've got all these features we had targeted for, this release 1 done, and we're down to just this one select size option, or that kind of thing. Especially if they're in a mindset of continuing to add features, this is a fantastic way to show them completion.
Thanks. Yeah.
Cameo on the stories on board application. I know that quite often you'll build out user stories, and then when you take that, you go into sprint planning or you start refining with the team, and a story might be sized quite large and break out and say, hey, let's break this into multiple stories. We break that out into multiple stories in JIRA. And does that somehow translate? Will that translate back into multiple stories and stories on board?
That is a fantastic question, Tracy. When you make new stories in JIRA, if you have them synced, it will put them in here. And then you have to essentially move them. You end up with a column that's called stories from JIRA. And if you link them back to your epics, the yellow tags, then they'll just drop into the right place. But if they're not linked, then it's like, oh, I'll just stick it over here. But yeah, you can now, if you break a story out, and I'm just assuming when you say that, you mean you've created a couple. Under basic search, maybe you come up with 3 different versions of search. You break them out each into their own user stories. And yes, those would reflect here. What this doesn't reflect, though, any tasks, any subtasks, this directly ties to a story, which, for those of you that are super Agile nerds, best practice is the actual tasks aren't anything other than developer efforts around that are underneath a user story. I've seen teams not use them that way, but that's best practice for us. Other questions? Now, one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we do trainings like this, and not just with our product teams and our project managers, is I truly believe great software is built when engineers and a whole team, and I use engineers too in this case, I mean, just everybody on the development team has visibility into what we're actually building. Like I've seen firsthand, we've all seen firsthand the difference between a team that understands collectively what they're trying to achieve versus a bunch of people who are just being given, you know, tasks, or even small kind of like, here's this small thing that we're doing. It just makes it so we can all work together a lot better. And that's why I think we all want to make sure we understand these things. Okay, questions?
What's our access? Do we have a login for Stories on Board, or can I get a login?
You can get a login. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Anybody can get a login. Generally, we haven't been, you know, we don't create them as part of, you know, coming onto Solution Stream, just because not everybody always needs them, but absolutely happy to get you a login for one, and to anybody who feels like they could benefit. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, Charlie will now sing a few selections from oh wait, no, that was Josh. Josh will now sing a few selections. I don't even know if Josh is here.
He's on. At least I thought he's on.
Josh is on.
Okay.
And I like
Josh, what are you going to sing for us?
Josh pretends like he can't hear.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I figured he was going through his Christmas Carol selection to see which ones he wanted to.
That'd be super cool.
No, I think this is fantastic, Cameo, and I think that's always been one of the struggles that I think all software has, is some sort of visibility. You know, software development has is some sort of visibility into what's actually going on in the project. And, you know, typically there's three groups that have to, at least three groups that have to know what's going on, and it's either, and those three are the client / stakeholder / whomever, and then the product / product management level, and then the development level and delivery level. And what we find more often than not is there are tools out there and methodologies out there that are great for communicating to two of those groups. Like a developer and a project manager can communicate very well through Jira Project Board, but it doesn't mean a lot to the client. And what Jira provides doesn't often mean a lot to the client, or vice versa. There's other tools. I think that Stories on Board does a great job of building and automating that communication, or the ability to communicate about these things at each of those levels. So, and story mapping in general. I said Stories on Board, but it's actually the process, the story mapping process, that's most important. And Stories on Board just happens to be a good tool for that. So.
Yeah, that we might ultimately, you know, you can never tell when we might get away from it. In fact, my little slide deck here, this story, oh, cons, look, no cons. This a little example here was from our first remote solution maps that we did earlier this year for DDI, where we did everything inside of Miro. You know, and traditionally when we're in a solution map, we're building the user story map with physical stickies on the walls of the conference room, whether it be the client conference room or our conference room. Well, this was our first remote one. We didn't have that option. And so we built it inside of Miro. And this is the one we created with the client. And then we digitized it afterwards and then used it to drive the development after that. So yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I really like about these that I think has been very helpful with projects I've used, like a story map like that, and the stories on board, is that where Jira and tools like Jira are really good at helping you know what you're working on and where you're at. But like you mentioned in this, they become very cluttered because you do have to get down into the tasks and in the details. And then the next thing that happens is, as you're going sprint to sprint, you're kind of the visibility into the progress you've made and the distance you've come disappears. It gets completed in the sprint, and yes, you can see a sprint summary, but it doesn't really show you where you're at on the timeline of this whole big project. And so having that nice view for clients and development team that it's not a daily look at, but even so, when you're looking at the next sprints and stuff, being able to pull that thing up and saying, here is the big project and look at how far we've come and where is the next section to drill into. That's super helpful in my mind. And I just have found that been very, very nice kind of high level view. It's the 50,000 view for whoever needs it at whatever moment, right?
Yeah, right. Without all the minutia like drowning you.
Right.
Both you and Steve have mentioned tasks or subtasks, I guess they would be. Sutherland recommends not using tasks, but having stories smaller so that you don't need tasks. Be interesting sometime in one of these sessions to talk about that.
Yeah, I've struggled with that concept for a long time, and I'm a big fan of his. I think, and at the same time, like when I'm looking at an individual story, and I closed my example here now, but if I have a user story that's around, as a user, I want to do search, that still doesn't tell a developer the things that he needs to do. Or conversely, that doesn't, if I am a developer and I'm sitting down in sprint planning, I really like the idea of somebody being able to say, okay, well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to, it's almost like the recipe that they're writing for themselves of all of the different, the to-do list between I'm ready to sit down and start developing, and now I have, a search. I would love to have, conversations. This is one of the things that we struggle with on user story maps, is converting them, and making sure that we have the right size of features. I have this conversation a lot with both Charlie and Josh and others about how do we break them down. But it's interesting because in an ideal user story, it's so user focused, it just seems super disconnected from what a developer might do, or what a designer might do, or any number of people who are doing something that's going to ultimately result in search. We end up with a designer that needs to go and do wireframing or user testing. Does that fall under that story? In my mind, it does, but I don't know. Inspect and adapt and change. These processes are how we do, and then we want to know how to do better. So yeah, I'm all for the conversation all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of what drives our story size ends up being the level of granularity we can get into in a solution map. And so the size of the time spent in a solution map often ends up driving the fact that our stories come out a little bit larger. Now, that's not to say that they can't be broken down further at that point. And in a sprint planning session, and then have stories on board kind of updated as that happens. But then you wonder, in that scenario, you kind of lose some of the correlation with the things you were talking about in the solution map, which is also a challenge. So it's an interesting scenario for sure.
Okay, Okay, so it's 12:41. I committed last time that my goal is to be done with these always by 12:45 so that if no other reason that I can get lunch because I get grumpy. And Charlie has made me commit if I on days that I have meetings with him not to come to them grumpy. So but I also want you if anyone would like to use this chance just to say hi to each other, you know, until we can get back into physical space. It is, I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I get tired of not talking to people. So there you go. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing that, Cameo.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cameo.
Thanks for
Daniel,
sharing
can you
your
hang on for
genius
just one
with us.
second?
I'm not going to go anywhere, but I am going to stop the recording and get out some carrots.
Perfect. I just wanted to talk to you about Mastermind real quick and give you an update on that
Ooh.
call.
Okay.
Well, in that case, I am definitely leaving right now. See you
All
later.
right. Get out,
Good to see
Steve.
everybody.
Thank you all for coming.